My name is Will Brown. I serve as Executive Director of Recruitment and Admissions at Clayton State University, just on the south side of city of Atlanta, about 15, 20 minutes south of downtown Atlanta, and public four-year institution. We'll talk more about it in just a little bit.
Yes, thank you. I'm Mr. Jamar Logan. I'm the post-secondary transition specialist with the Cobb County Schools. I've also entered my email and phone number into the chat, and definitely looking forward to reviewing the admissions process with you all.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Sheffield, and I am the program manager for post-secondary access for College AIM. So welcome.
And good evening. My name is Abriel Beckham, and I'll be the moderator for this presentation.
All right, let's see if on my end, if I've got the ability to change slides, because I know I'm up first.
All right.
Actually, that works right there. Thank you. Again, my name is Will, and I'm going to start us off this evening talking about just an overview of admission requirements, not specific to Clayton State, but really we're going to talk about, again, the public institutions in the state of Georgia as a whole. Some of you may know the name, the USG, which stands for University System of Georgia. It represents all of our public colleges and universities in the university system. So yes, the four-year schools. This is going to be separate from like the technical college system of Georgia. So again, I'm giving you some information, not specific to Clayton State, but if you've heard of schools such as the University of Georgia or Georgia Tech, Kennesaw State, Georgia Southern, Georgia College. Again, these are all just examples of University System of Georgia schools. But I've got 3 slides for you as we talk about admissions processes and a lot of general information for you all as you get ready to work on these college applications. I think as you look at different types of schools, whether you're looking at public or private, schools in the state of Georgia or outside the state, some of the basic questions you want to ask yourself when you start to look at admissions websites, trying to get a feel for like, what do I submit? What is this college looking at? What does it take to get into the college? It's really what type of review does that particular school utilize? We break it down normally to like 3 different types of review processes. Number 1 is what we call an access institution or review process. What this means is that the institution is going to ask you typically to submit an application for admission, high school transcript, and they're going to place you in classes in their institution based on how you did in high school, like your high school GPA. If the institution takes into account standardized test scores, then maybe like a certain score will get you into certain classes and so forth. But that's what we call an access institution. Let me actually go back 1 slide. I got just a couple more to cover before we talk about GPA.
All right. I'm going to let you go ahead and do it.
You're all good. All right. So again, that's access. Number 2, a minimum-based review process. Maybe you go to college's website and they have like really distinct language saying something to the tune of, to gain admission to our college, you have to have a 2.5 high school GPA. Again, just throwing out a number that would give you an example here. If they're considering standardized test scores, you know, maybe you got to have a 17 on the ACT composite. Not necessarily, again, numbers for everybody, but just examples where, again, it tells you, you know exactly what you need to get into that type of school, the GPA, and if they're considering test scores. And then some of those schools, they may say, well, if you have like a really high GPA, but the test scores are under, or vice versa, maybe they still have an enrollment opportunity for you. But again, minimum based, they're kind of saying this is the minimum in terms of what it takes to get admission. If you're above those minimums, it doesn't mean it's 100%. You still got to pass all the background check and all that fun stuff with the college, but still you got a really good shot of gaining admission if you're indeed above those minimums. 3rd type is what we call holistic, and it's not just about numbers, GPA, test scores, but I've listed some examples here of non-academic criteria that some of these holistic schools will be utilizing. Rigor of curriculum, if a school lists that, it means that they want to see not just your grades, but what classes you took at your high school when you submit your high school transcript. So for example, if you've taken rigorous courses, it could be any combination of honors, dual enrollment, AP or advanced placement, IB programs. These are just examples of courses that many colleges, if they take that into consideration, what they deem as rigorous. And if you have a school, if you go to a high school that offers those types of courses, it's always a great opportunity to try and challenge yourself in high school, because it's also going to look good in terms of a college admission process. We just don't want you to take every single one of those rigorous courses thinking that that's how you get into college either. Balance is key, but that's just rigor of curriculum. Some of these schools will look at trends. If your grades go upward freshman to senior year, that will stand out to a school. Leadership and awards that you've won, like you can submit a resume to these types of schools, community service work, sometimes letters of recommendation. So again, I've listed some of the items that if it's a school that's holistic, they may be asking for. I talked about rec letters, resumes. They may ask for like a writing sample or an essay from you. And some even do interviews for admission to the college as well. Generally speaking, the more competitive a school is, the more holistic they're going to be in regards to the application process. Doesn't mean school's good or bad based on what type of review. Everybody's different. But generally, the more competitive schools are going to be the ones doing that holistic review. All right, next slide. All right, so $1 million question right here. How is my high school GPA calculated when you submit these applications to colleges? The answer, as it goes for a lot of these questions, it depends. It depends on what school you're looking into and so forth. But here's some of that vocabulary that you may see on colleges' websites. So number one, some schools utilize a cumulative GPA when they look at your high school transcript, and some do a core or an academic GPA. Cumulative would mean that they look at all your grades, including fine arts electives, usually what you would see on your high school transcript as well. And then many colleges, they do a core GPA. What that means, they don't take into account electives, fine arts. It's basically looking at your math, your science, your social science, English, and world language courses. Again, those are your 5 core subject classes. Many schools will just isolate those courses and do a GPA calculation. Weighted versus unweighted. There are some schools where if you take those rigorous courses I was mentioning a little while ago, like those AP or IB or dual enrollment courses, they'll actually give you a little bit of extra bump, so to say, in the GPA calculation. And that would be an example of what we call like a weighted GPA, where again, they're giving that bump or that weight to your rigorous courses to kind of reward you for taking those challenging subjects. Versus unweighted. There are some colleges where, yeah, they want you to take those, but they may not mess with the GPA calculation. Or if your school does this weighting I'm describing, they may try to level the playing field for everybody and say it's an unweighted GPA calculation. So the weight versus unweighted really refers to the rigor in terms of how a college may evaluate that. Again, as I've described here, every GPA calculation is different. We don't want you to think that you have to memorize how all these different schools do their calculations. Just ask, and then we'll always share with you what our calculation is when you apply to us and send us your transcript, and make sure that hopefully you're meeting our minimum requirements and so forth. One quick plug is that if you're interested in staying in the state of Georgia for your college experience, utilizing the Hope Scholarship, same thing here. They do a very unique GPA calculation to deem your Hope Scholarship eligibility upon high school graduation. So the last thing we want is for you to say to yourself, hey, I got a 3.1 high school GPA. It's what it says on my transcript. I've got the Hope Scholarship. I'm good. Then you find out that this Hope GPA calculation is a little different. It is indeed a core or academic GPA calculation. They do their own weighting and their own formula. Last thing we want is you see a 3.1 on your transcript that's actually cumulative. Your Hope GPA is a 2.9 upon graduation. I hope that doesn't happen to anybody, because if it does, unfortunately, the Hope GPA calculation does not round upward. So again, don't have to worry about memorizing this calculation. If you go to a website called gafutures.org, one of the many helpful things on there is a hot link that says My Hope GPA. When you click that, you log into your account and so forth, you can actually track your Hope GPA specifically as you progress through high school. Check that out if you're a senior. Hopefully, if you're already above the 3.0, it's all about when you graduate, but you maintain it. And then if you're just a little bit under, hopefully you've got a chance in that senior year to bump it up above the requirement. Or if you're looking for Zell Miller Scholarship, same thing. Again, because that calculation is all about what you finish with upon high school graduation. But My Hope GPA is a hot link on that GA Futures website. Very helpful. All right, I got one more slide for us here. How are standardized test scores considered? And this is certainly a big question in the midst of what we're all going through right now. So as I've put here, not all, but many institutions around the state of Georgia and the nation, many institutions, I don't have an exact number, but it's a growing list every week. Some schools are just now updating. But when we say test optional, some of these schools are doing it for high school seniors who would be applying for admission for 2021. Then there are some schools who are test optional for what would be high school juniors and sophomores right now, meaning 2022, 23. Everybody's different. Currently, the University System of Georgia, so again, Clayton State, Kennesaw State, the schools I was mentioning earlier, we are test optional as a system. All of our USG schools, not everybody in the state, but just this state system, we're test optional for 2021, spring, summer, and fall. We have not made a decision as to beyond that, but test optional. It just basically means you don't have to send in SAT or ACT scores. Each institution has their own high school GPA requirement that you'd be required to meet for admission in the event that you do not have standardized test scores currently. And again, those GPA minimums and such are different. Some schools are still holistic, but otherwise as a system, we've gone test optional. Keep in mind that test optional for admission to a college is one thing, but then you may be required to submit test scores for scholarship consideration at a particular institution, or NCAA eligibility if we have any student athletes in the crowd tonight. Again, last thing we want is for you to be excited about gaining admission to a particular school, but then you find out you can't be considered for scholarship opportunities because you don't have standardized test scores. There's many schools where they are test optional for admission and for the scholarship process. But the big thing is to take note of is if they're test optional, see if these schools that are on your radar, if they're asking for anything else in place of standardized test scores in a year like this year, because many schools are indeed doing that. It'll be, for example, they want to see your resume, they want to see a writing supplement. There's many schools that'll ask for something in place of where you would normally send test scores to further you consider you, again, either for admission or for scholarships there. So just a little bit different part of the process, but something to take note of at each school that you're looking at. I believe that wraps up my portion of the slides, but I am not going anywhere. I'll be hanging tight for any questions that anybody may have, either about Clayton State or the USG or admission requirements as a whole. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brown. You did a great job of kind of setting the tone for us. So again, everyone, I think there were several people that hopped on the call after we did our introduction. So I'll just quickly introduce myself again. I am Mr. Jamar Logan. I'm the post-secondary transition specialist with the DeKalb County Schools. I work very closely with the counseling teams to support all students in the district with all things college and career. And our team specifically focuses on regions of schools. And so I focus on Region 4, which is the Clarkston, Stone Mountain, and the DeKalb Early College cluster. But there are 6 other people that focus on the entire district with us. So my information is in the chat, my name, phone number, and email if you need to reach out to me. So we're gonna dive into the application process. So we could get started with the first slide. And so this is what we're gonna cover. We're gonna cover Navigants. So a big part of the presentation will be Navigants. Have you logged in? Do you understand what it is? How do you match your Navigants and your Common Application account? What are some of the key features of Navigants? And then we'll also talk about the GA Futures website, which Mr. Brown referenced, but we'll talk about it from the vantage point of this is where you go to apply to school. So the next slide is going to cover a brief video that demonstrates how to do the Navigants and the Common Application matching process. So we're going to take a look at this. It's just only a few minutes. I think it's less than 4 minutes. So if we can cue that up, and this will demonstrate how you match your Common App and your Navigants account.
Okay, let's see. We don't have that link of where we can.
I think you just click on the screen itself, the picture, and if you double click, it should be embedded in there. Maybe not, huh?
No.
Okay. So we won't watch the video, but what I'll say about that is, once you log in to Navigants, there'll be a icon there that says match accounts, and you will essentially click on that, but you have to create a Common App account first, okay? So you have to go to commonapp.org, create an account at that website, and then you have to add at least one school into your Common App list, okay? And then you have to add your high school into the Common Application account. Once you do that, you have to complete what's called a FERPA, which is an acronym. It's a release waiver that basically says that you won't read any of your teachers, your letters of recommendations from your teachers, and it's a data sharing agreement that will also allow your information from your Common Application account to be shared with the Naviance account. So as you populate all of your schools into your Common App account, they will automatically populate into Naviance. So as you build your list in the Common Application and apply to all of your schools, they'll automatically transfer over into the Naviance platform. So there is a video, and we can send that out you know, after the conference as well to any students, since we weren't able to play that tonight. So we can go over to the next slide. So Common App. So first of all, what is Common App really? So Common App is basically where you would go to apply to school. Now I mentioned Naviance. Naviance, you do not apply to school using Naviance, okay? You apply to school using the Common Application, or in most cases, if not Common App, then GA Futures. So these are the 19 schools that are in Georgia that are listed in the Common Application. So I have them categorized into public and private. So I know the primary focus of our presentation is the public schools, but I did want to note that there are private schools as well in the Common Application. And basically, these public schools are mainly the research institutions here in the state of Georgia. And then, of course, you have the AUC schools, the Morehouse, Spelman, and Clark, and several other private schools, Mercer down in Macon and Oglethorpe. And so you can see the schools that the Common App application covers in the state of Georgia. Now, one thing I want to note, that's a tip I have here at the bottom, is for the University of Georgia and Georgia Tech, they have an automatic admissions program. So essentially, once your grades post in January, the school administration will submit the names of the projected valedictorian and salutatorian in the class, and they will receive automatic admissions into the University of Georgia and Georgia Tech. So if you think that you're a person that's in the top of your class, or if you have a chance to be the valedictorian or the salutatorian, please, 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 I implore you to apply to the University of Georgia and Georgia Tech, just because of the automatic admissions policy. Now, there are always people that don't apply to those schools and the deadlines pass, and you might happen to be named the valedictorian or the salutatorian. Well, can you go back and get it? The answer is no, you can't. So definitely you want to make sure that if you're, you know, have a chance to be named valedictorian or salutatorian, that you certainly apply to the University of Georgia and Georgia Tech because of that automatic admissions policy. Okay, we can go over to the next slide. So let's talk about some key features of Naviance. Okay, so the main thing, the first thing is building your college list, right? Adding your colleges into the Naviance platform. Okay, now if we were able to watch the video with matching, again, if you enter your schools in the Common App, since you're matching the accounts, right? You're matching it with Naviance and Common App, then those schools automatically populate, right? But what if you're applying to a school that's not in Common App, right? And I'll talk about that more later on in the presentation, but there are several of them. Valdosta State, Clayton State. Those are gafutures.org schools, and that's the website where you go to apply to those schools. So you need to enter all of those schools into your Naviance list so that you can build your list for the schools. Now, sending documents, supporting documents to complete your application so that you can get your package, if you will, ready for review from the admissions team at the various colleges, right? You have to submit a completed application, and in some cases, you have to submit letters of recommendations, okay? Mainly in those Common App schools for the most part, but there are some exceptions. So you want to pay close attention to each school's policy to see if they require written letters of recommendations. But in Navient, this is where you request your letters of recommendations. All DeKalb County school students, this is the sole place where you go to request your letters of recommendations. All of your teachers that are DeKalb County school teachers should automatically populate when you go into the platform and request a letter of recommendation for them. Now, there's a special case for some students, right? Case in point, I work with a lot of students at the Early College Academy, so DECA. So they say, Mr. Logan, what if I want my college professor to do my letter of recommendation and they're not a DeKalb County employee? So in that case, that professor won't populate in Navient. So you have to ask that professor to do the letter of recommendation via the common application under the other option, okay? So if there are any people that are in dual enrollment, for instance, that is seeking a recommendation from someone outside of the DeKalb County school system, like a college professor, you will have to submit that letter of recommendation via Common App and not Navient. But that's generally the only exception. Can we go back to that same slide? Yeah. And then you have the you're able to also request your transcripts in Navient. Okay, so this is where you would go to request your transcripts as well. And then there are several other features, but I'm just going to only focus on this super match. Now, this is a great tool that can help personalize your academic match for a series of institutions based on your preferences, right? Proximity, location, right? There are a lot of different criteria that you can pick, and it automatically will populate colleges that are a match and fit based on your personal preferences. So that's a real neat tool that's built inside of Navient. And then there's also a scholarship search tool inside of Navient in a database that's connected to Sally Mae's scholarships. And so definitely take advantage of that. These are just a few features of Navient, but these are the ones that I want to focus on today. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so the application. So generally speaking, there are just two main types of applications you can apply. Early, which is this is the season for that now in a few weeks, right? Generally mid-October, and in some cases through mid to late November. Most schools have an early application process, whether that be early decision and or early action. And then there's regular decision. I did want to note that in the state of Georgia, there are a few institutions that have regular decision deadlines that are early January, like January 1, right? Like the UGAs and the Georgia Techs, they have early admissions earlier regular decision deadlines, if you will. And so those are the two main types of applications. And then these are the ways that you can apply to colleges, okay? You can apply directly to the institution or going directly to the college website, right? You can do it via Common App. You can do it via Georgia Futures, or actually that's the wrong term. I'm dating myself. It's GA Futures. Once upon a time, it used to have Georgia in the title. And then you can also, there are some other platforms like the HBCU Common Application or the Coalition application or paper application as well. So definitely these are the ways that you can apply, and these are some of the timelines that you want to pay attention to as you seek to apply to these schools. And then I have a tip down here talking about the waivers and the fee waivers in the application process, and I'll talk more about that in my next slide. So this is just a screenshot of the GA Futures platform. So I hope that you have an account, but if you don't, you definitely want to go create one at gafutures.org. Mr. Brown has already touched on the fact that this is the website that you will go to monitor and track your HOPE GPA, in addition to applying to colleges in the state of Georgia. Okay. Now, the GA Futures schools. So I've noted all of the GA Future schools here, and I have them kind of categorized for the most part into the state colleges and the comprehensive university category. But for the most part, these are all of the schools in Georgia that receive the GA Futures application. Okay. These are a listing of all of those schools. If they're not on here, which are basically the 4 or 5 that we talked about earlier, they will be on Common App. Okay. Now, fee waivers. Okay, this is an important part of the process as well. So there are 2 basic types of fee waivers. There's fee waivers for the application, right? Waiving your fees for the application fee. And then there are fee waivers for testing, right? Waiving your fees for actually taking the test. So you can access both of those types of fee waivers from the College Board's website or the ACT website or the National Association for College Admissions Counseling, which also has a fee waiver that you can use for the application. And then they recently launched a enrollment deposit waiver as well. So definitely keep your eyes on that if that's a fit for you. And then I have some other tips down here about Zell Miller and some other scholarship opportunities. I think Mr. Brown touched on that, the importance of the testing piece, right? Not just for admissions, but for the scholarship. So we can keep rolling on. Let's know how we're doing on time here. All right, and so we talked some about this, but I want to drill down on this just a little bit more to talk about the university system test optional framework from, they're basically their GPA criteria by school in the state of Georgia. So these are the 4-year institutions in the state of Georgia, and by GPA, what the GPA requirement is and correlated directly with the institution. So as you can see with the 3.0, you have to have a minimum of a 3.0 for the University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, and I have them abbreviated, Augusta University and Georgia State. Now these next tier of schools are your comprehensive schools. So this is Georgia Southern. You have to have a 2.6, Kennesaw State, the University of West Georgia, and Valdosta. So the minimum GPA for the test optional policy is 2.6. And 2.4 for the next tier of schools, the Clayton, the Albany State, Columbus, etc., North Georgia. And so this is the GPA framework from which the test optional policy works. So you definitely want to check to see if you're academic match as you begin to apply to these schools. And then I think this is the last slide.
Okay.
And it's talking about the University of Georgia test optional policy for the next tier of schools. So this is a combination of 4-year schools, and some schools in this category also offers 2-year programs. But the minimum GPA criteria for those schools is 2.0.
Okay. We have a few more minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and let Mr. Corey go, and then we're going to ask him questions. So let's go ahead, and you can reintroduce yourself.
Awesome. All right. Good evening, everyone. Again, for those that came in a little late, again, I'm Dr. Sheffield, and I serve as the program manager for post-secondary access for College AIM. So I have the pleasure of speaking to everyone about everyone's favorite topic, money. So you've been admitted to college. And now you're trying to figure out how in the world am I going to pay for this? So basically, I'm going to talk a little bit about the financial aid process to make sure that you have a good understanding of what that is. So basically, given the overview of what financial aid is, financial aid is basically any type of funds that helps you to pay for your educational expenses. So when you are researching schools and looking at costs, you're going to see different things. You're going to see something listed as direct costs and something listed as indirect costs. Those 2 costs together will basically bill your cost of attendance. And so what's the difference between a direct and an indirect cost? And I'm going to break that down. Next slide.
Okay.
So your direct costs basically are I like to explain it as things that are non-negotiable, things that you absolutely have to pay. to stay enrolled at that institution. And so that's basically your tuition and fees, your on-campus housing, your meal plan, parking permits if necessary. So those are things that absolutely have to be paid. And then you have your indirect costs. So those are things that are basically associated with the cost of attending college, but are not necessarily paid directly to the school. So for example, your books, if you are living off campus, the rent for that off-campus housing, school supplies. So just as you go to school daily right now, you still have to buy, pay for, utensils or whatever. So that's a fee. Groceries, if you want some additional food in your room, which most college students do. And then the travel piece. A lot of students tend to not really think about this. If, let's say, for example, if you are going to UGA or a school that's 4 or 5 hours away, you have to factor in the cost, the gas of traveling back and forth to home. So when you put your direct costs and your indirect costs together, next slide, that basically builds your cost of attendance. And so one of the things that I like to tell my students, well, what I have to remind my students is that when they are researching schools, a lot of them tend to only look at the tuition and say, oh, this isn't that expensive. No, you have to really take into account every single thing that the school is asking for. So again, that tuition and fees, the books and supplies, room and board, personal costs, and transportation. So one of the things that I definitely want to make sure that you understand, when you are looking at researching schools, never let the cost of attendance deter you from applying. Because again, the whole reason that we're having this conversation right now is to talk about financial aid. And so there are ways for you to be able to pay for your college education, whether it be money coming directly from the institution or external scholarships and grants. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Next slide. So let's go ahead and dive into the different types of financial aid and those sources. So in terms of the forms of financial aid, you have your scholarships, you have your grants, you have your loans, and your work study programs. And so these can come from the federal government, the institution themselves, private foundations, professional service organizations, and employers and private companies. So it just really depends on, where it is that you're looking for this money, but your scholarships, grants, loans, and work study programs can come from all of these sources. And so when you are in the process of applying to school, it is definitely a good idea to make sure that you are using all of your resources to make sure that you have all bases covered in regards to your financial aid. And I'm going to dig into the different forms on the next slide. So again, types of financial aid. We have our merit-based. So specifically for this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about our Hope Scholarship. So of course, because this session is geared towards in-state public schools, definitely have to talk about the Hope Scholarship, our need-based grants, Pell Grants, non-need-based grants, student and or parent loans, employment opportunities, and opportunities for you to save as a student. Next slide. So when we are looking at scholarships and grants, ladies and gentlemen, this is free money. And so this is what we want. We want the money that you don't necessarily have to pay back. Now, what I will say is that when we get to loans, it is part of a financial aid package. And I think that when you are looking at your overall financial aid award, please consider that, as part of your award, and you can accept or deny that as you see fit. But understand that loans are part of a financial aid award letter. But we want the scholarships and we want the grants because that is what we call free money. And so there are tons of scholarships that are out there. So you get a scholarship for your height, your ethnicity, your gender, religious affiliation. There are so many scholarships that are available. How do you find them? How do you get access to those things? And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. And then you have your grants, which are basically need-based, which are based on your affordability or how much your parents, the income your parents bring into your household. So that is something that is based on either the institution or by the federal government. And we're going to talk a little bit about on the next slide. So going specifically into scholarships, start your search early. You don't have to be a senior to really begin to start your scholarship search process. And I think that's one of the downfalls that a lot of students tend to face. They tend to wait until their senior year or late into their senior year to actually begin searching for scholarships. if you are a student in need of financial aid, your part-time job should be applying for scholarships. So if you have any type of downtime on the weekend, it's probably a good practice just to apply to 2 to 3 scholarships every single week, just to get into the habit of making sure that you are using the resources that are available to you. And so just making sure that you're applying for everything that you are eligible for. Look for scholarships even after you begin college, because again, those costs are still going to be there, and you want to make sure that you are still bringing in some of those funds. Some of the resources that I have definitely directed you to, students to, again, you have heard this term tons of times already on this presentation, and that's gafutures.org. That is a really good website for students to navigate, to look for scholarships. And another resource that I tend to send my students to is jlvcollegecounseling.com. And so that website actually breaks down the scholarships by month, and also who's eligible. So if you are looking for STEM scholarships, if you are looking for scholarships based on race and ethnicity, whatever, that's a really good website to use to navigate and search for scholarships. Next slide. So securing your federal financial aid. And so the FAFSA, let me say that word again, the FAFSA, I'm gonna say it one more time for you. The FAFSA, it is now October the 6th. And so FAFSA opened on October the 1st, which basically means that the federal free application for federal student aid has now been open for 6 days. So if you want to secure any type of funds from the federal government, basically your grants, work study, and I'm going to get into this specifically, you have to do your FAFSA. And so in order for you to access your FAFSA or apply to complete your FAFSA, you must visit studentaid.gov, and then it will walk you through the process of how to complete those steps. And so if you have any type of trouble, if you are a student within College AIM, of course, I am your resource. So just make sure that you hit up Dr. Sheffield, and I will basically help you in completing that requirement. But for everyone else, please make sure that you have a conversation with your counselor if you need to make sure that you have applied for your federal student aid. Next slide. So in terms of like federal, in order to apply for the FAFSA, you must of course be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, a high school graduate, be applying to an eligible degree or certificate program. You must have a valid social security number, and males must register for selective service. And so if you have a question about any of these, just make sure that you have a conversation with your school counselor or a counselor in your CBO program. Next slide.
Question for you. I'm sorry, I hate to cut you off, but we have to get to some questions because we have 4 minutes left with the students. So I'm so sorry I did not manage our time wisely.
No problem. No problem.
Let's go ahead and get to some of these questions.
I've addressed some of them in the chat.
Okay, let's see. Thank you for doing that. Okay, yeah, I see someone is helping monitor some of those questions. So if you guys have any more questions that you need answered, go ahead and drop them in the chat, or the ones that are open. I see that 5 of those were already answered. Thank you, thank you. Perfect.
Is it okay if I repeat that question just in case, so that everybody knows what the question was, just in case somebody else has that same concern?
Yeah, I'm looking, where do you see that question?
So there was a question about whether or not Navient matches with the HBCU coming out.
Okay.
And the answer is no, it doesn't. It only matches with the common application. So I hope that addresses that question. If not, definitely chime in to the chat so I can answer it again. And then there was another one. That was someone who'd asked about what if they're not a student in DeKalb County, because I know I started referencing DeKalb quite a bit. So if you're not, and I'm not sure exactly what your question is in reference to that, but if it's in reference to Naviance, then of course, you do, if your school system is using it, then, you can use it, but if not, then it's not something that you have to use if you're outside of DeKalb.
Perfect. Okay, let's see. I think I'm just going through, I think all the questions. Is Naviance able to request international transcripts is another question.
International transcripts from a student? I'm not sure if I understand that question.
see. I guess she's asking, are they able to request international transcripts? I'm not sure. I don't know. Can one of you
Yeah,
answer?
so if you're a student that's in DeKalb, like, and you're at the International Center, then the International Center can request your transcript if you're a student coming from outside of the country, and we can obtain it that way. But it wouldn't be via Naviance, if that's your question.
Okay.
So it would be an International Center could help with that. I'm
Someone,
assuming it may be related to that. Okay.
okay. Let's see. How is the financial aid at these institutions? Does the school offer full coverage in scholarships and grants, dual enrollments, credits, transfer overs? I think that's two questions in one, though.
Okay.
Let's see. We can answer the first question. How is the financial aid at these institutions? Does the school offer full coverage in scholarships and grants?
Will, can you hop in on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be different at every institution. I want everybody to really think of this in terms of two different angles. Number one is, yes, how much scholarships, grants, financial aid does an institution offer? You know, it's going to be different by student as well as aid, or excuse me, by institution. So, for example, you know, some of you may be getting more scholarship money at a given institution based on, of course, like your high school GPA and your resume, things like that. The other way I want you all to think about this question is, don't go to the institution that offers the most financial aid. Think about that bottom line price. And what I mean by that is, if a college comes your way and says, congratulations, you've been admitted, here's a $20,000 scholarship. Yes, that sounds tremendous, but it's likely that the institution's starting point, the price tag, is going to be more expensive than, say, like your average public institution. So Clayton State, I'll be upfront, we don't offer a $20,000 scholarship because our cost of attendance, like tuition and everything, we're not talking about $20,000 per term or per year or anything like that for a Georgia resident. We would be paying you to go to college if that was the case. So we may not be able to match a scholarship like another school, but I say that bottom line, meaning the cost of going to that school minus how much scholarships and grants that you get from that particular institution. That number is what you want to focus on and compare at your different institutions.
Okay. We have another question. Do students who English is not their first language, are they required to take a test now? Most of the schools, the tests are optional. I don't know if anyone can answer that one for them.
Yeah, if the students in the state of Georgia, number one, they'd be looking at the high school curriculum and seeing if English was completed as part of like high school graduation requirements. Also, the university system of Georgia, these public institutions we've been discussing tonight, there's certain curriculum requirements you have to be eligible for admission. It's going to be 4 units of English. That's, again, not just going to cover you for high school graduation, but for eligibility with admission. Otherwise, if we're talking about a student who is not in the state of Georgia, and you talk about English not being a first language, there are indeed English proficiency exams, and some institutions are indeed test optional for those English proficiency exams. But then there's also some remote offerings for those tests, meaning like a proficiency exam you can take remotely on a computer or something like that. So when we say test optional, we're mostly referring to SAT and ACT, because those tests are not able to be taken at this time, just like at home on your computer. English proficiency exams, it's kind of a mixed bag, but there's definitely more remote offerings for those than SAT and ACT.
Okay. And one last question before we wrap up the session. For dual enrollment, would you apply as a transfer or a first-year student?
That's a great question.
Great question.
The majority of institutions are going to want you to apply for freshman admission, and that does not mean that the dual enrollment classes won't transfer. The reason that we want you to do this is because, number one, you're getting high school credit in addition to college credit for these courses. But then number two, we really, say you are admitted to this particular institution, we want you to potentially begin your college experience with us, with your peers, students who graduated from their high schools around the same time, around the same age, and so forth. You may indeed be coming in academically as like a sophomore at the college. You're taking like second year courses, and in those classes, you have some second year college students. but we want you to like live on campus with your peers, again, fellow first year students at the college. So everybody's different, but the large majority of schools are going to want you to do freshman admission for your application. But then don't forget, if you do indeed have dual enrollment experience, send that high school transcript and the college dual enrollment transcript to the admissions office. We got to have both of those just so we can evaluate all your high school classes.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I would like to give a virtual hand clap to all of our panelists. I know Dr. Corey had to hop off, but thank you guys so much for joining us